alaikum, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. You're watching us on Muslim Network TV, on Galaxy 19, Roku TV, Apple TV, and various other platforms. So we're always welcome, and we're really grateful to have you here today. Today, I wanted to talk about something that is extremely close to my heart as a survivor. And I have often talked about this in previous shows. We have had victims on the show, and they've been really privileged to highlight their voices. Today, the topic that, as you probably have guessed, is sexual exploitation, specifically sexual trafficking, and the use of digital media to target younger and younger victims. Currently, there are more than 4 million victims of sex trafficking globally, and 99% of them are women and girls. There's no official estimate of sex trafficking victims in the United States, and we're going to learn more about that with our guests today. We hear that there are almost 7 to 10 victims who are exploited in Asia. So 7 and 10 people, 7 and 10, let that sink in, were exploited in Asia and the Pacific region. Girls in foster care are particularly vulnerable. And why is this so important to the Muslim community, to those of us who might be listening to this show? Because these are topics that are often ignored, we don't talk about them. They're taboo. You're not going to go into a local mosque and hear a khutbah about them or have a circle of learning but a victim could be right next door right praying next to you. So this is something that we really have to learn more about. In the digital age, it has brought with it many ways to connect, many ways to keep people globally connected. But what it has also brought with it is pornography exposure and abuse, sexually explicit and sexually violent video games, child sexual abuse images, things like spy camming, which I have no idea about, and I hope to God our guest today is going to tell us more about it. Many of us as parents might be scared and have heard of the term sexting, and what does that mean for our children? I read about sugar daddy sites, and some of these things are very horrific, and some of them seem very innocuous, but suddenly take a dangerous turn. So how are advocates fighting this growth across the web? And what can we as individuals do to be aware, to protect ourselves and protect our loved ones, and others to the best of our abilities? To speak with us about this and much more is Haley McNamara. Thank you so much for being here, Haley.
Thank you so much for having me.
Haley, tell us more about yourself. I know of your work at the National Committee Against Sexual Exploitation. Please tell me how you got involved with this work and how long have you been doing it?
Yes, so I started in this work like you, just knowing so many individuals throughout my life who've been harmed by one form of sexual exploitation and abuse or another. And so that's how I found this organization and started working for it. I've been with them for 5 years. Really, our thesis is that all forms of sexual exploitation and abuse are interconnected. They cannot be solved in a vacuum. So we have to, like you said, we have to be talking about all these different things: pornography, sex trafficking, child abuse, sugar dating. It all links together. So our organization is nonpartisan, and we're working with really diverse allies to promote policies that recognize this fact, bring justice to victims through lawsuits when possible, and really just to help engage the public more.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, what can sexual exploitation look like?
It can manifest in so many different ways. So, of course, there's sex trafficking, which is a commercial sex act. Something of value is exchanged, and there's force, fraud, or coercion. A lot of the times people hear sex trafficking and they think of someone bound by actual chains. Sometimes that happens, certainly does, but often there's psychological coercion. So you might not look at the person and realize that they're being exploited in that way. Also be abuse of a child. There's also sexual objectification, which we see a lot in media and especially in pornography. So really there's so many different forms, but it's typically the use and abuse of a person for the gratification of another.
Definitely. And a lot of times we think these issues are really far away. But my niece was just sharing how in her high school, public high school in Virginia, young girls are sex trafficked after school ends. So can you tell us about this phenomena?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's becoming more and more common. Like you mentioned earlier, in the age of the internet, we're more connected than ever, but that also connects children with potential predators. There was a recent study that came out that showed that children can sometimes be groomed online in less than 20 minutes.
Wow.
Someone can sometimes it takes days and sometimes it takes longer, but it can go that quickly. I recently met with some young teenage survivors of sex trafficking who were groomed entirely on social media. So it really shows the importance of speaking with our children about safety on social media, not speaking with strangers, but even teaching them about their own boundaries, because often children will be speaking with someone on social media because they think that they're a friend. They don't realize that they're a stranger, that there's someone with bad intent. So certainly, this is an age-old problem, but it has become even closer. The most dangerous neighborhood in town is now just on our phones.
Wow. And so suppose, let's take that a little bit further, because I know there's a lot of times several parents who watch this. I'll share an experience I just had recently with my 13-year-old son. There's a online channel called Discord, where young people, they go on and play games, and he's allowed to play games with his school friends. But I noticed that he was talking to somebody who claimed that they were 17 years old, and I did not know this person. So I asked him about it. And he said that I just met him, he's a friend's friend, and he doesn't have any more friends. Why is a 17-year-old being friends with a 13-year-old young boy? And it was very troubling. What happens in these cases? That how would you give advice to me as a parent? What should I be talking to my 13-year-old about?
Well, first of all, I would commend you for, being involved enough in your child's digital life that you're aware of who they're connecting with, and then bringing it up to him and having that conversation. I think those are absolutely the first most important steps. And I'd also just note, a lot of the times we think about girls being groomed online, but it happens with boys too. And especially we're seeing that through video game sites. And really anywhere where there's a chat function or a direct message function. Those seem to be just system vulnerabilities that make it easier for that to happen. But certainly just having conversations. I think that there's different stages based on the maturity and age of your child. Some people will sometimes withhold certain platforms based on how young a child is, or have parental controls on. Certainly go and check the parental controls, YouTube it. Someone will walk you through how to set that up for whatever platforms your kids are using. But really what you need to do is to develop an internal filter with your children, because at the end of the day, they need to learn about how to be safe online in this day and age. So teaching them about, boundaries, especially if anyone asks them for identifying information, even if they think it's a friend of a friend. That's exactly how it often goes. Teaching them the importance of keeping that information private, not sending or receiving sexually explicit images, which are often used in the grooming process to then blackmail or extort that child into doing even more. And I think my last thing I would say too is, don't get so scared that you freak out if your child brings up something like this to you, whether that they've been sent an explicit message that someone they don't know, or that you don't know is a real person is contacting with them, because that can scare your child to not share with you anymore. So I think keeping an even keel, but keeping that conversation open is really important.
Definitely. No, thank you so much for that. And honestly, it's how do we even know that 17-year-old isn't a 40-year-old talking to your child? So most states have, I also wanted to really commend the work that the Center of Sexual Exploitation has done in policy work, where it comes to, because a lot of times individuals may experience this, but collectively putting policies in place to address some of these issues is extremely important. Please share some policy improvements, especially on social media, online advertising, retail, that you have been involved with, especially, and the center has been involved with.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the most important, I think, pieces of legislation right now is the Earn It Act, and that's making its way through Congress. And it's very important because the way that in America the law is on social media is that these social media companies have no liability at all. And we run into a problem of incentives, because they have less incentive to protect children online than they do to use maybe data in order to advertise, and because they can make money off of that. They don't really have any legal incentive to proactively go after child sexual abuse materials, sometimes known child pornography, online grooming, etc. So what the Earn It Act does is it basically says you can keep your immunity from liability if you're following some best business practices, if you're actively doing your best to remove this material online. So that's a really important bill, and I would encourage everyone to call their representatives to make sure that they're supporting it. It's getting a lot of bipartisan support, which we love to see. And when it comes to retail and hotels, we find that it's very effective for individuals to even reach out to some of these different companies. And we've gotten a lot of corporate policies changed in recent years just by galvanizing people to tweet at them, send an email to them. And a lot of that's through a campaign called the Dirty Dozen List. And we make it very easy for you to contact these companies. And we've had four major hotel chains stop selling hardcore pornography in their rooms. We've had Google improve policies, including removing pornographic apps from their app store. We've got the Department of Defense to stop selling pornography magazines on Army and Air Force bases. So it's amazing and encouraging to me how much individuals reaching out to companies and entities can really make a difference on policy.
Really. And tell us more about the, I believe Senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley, has introduced a right to sue legislation for victims of trafficked by pornography sites. And perhaps before we even go to that, I'd love to show, this is a intersection of Haley's work and our work. Justice for All and the Center for Sexual Against Sexual Exploitation are part of a campaign called Trafficking Hub against one of the world's largest pornography providers, Pornhub. If we could watch a little video about the center's work on this. Yes, Rose's story is absolutely one of the most terrifying ones I've ever heard. And just as you were talking about earlier, it was just a normal walk outside her house. She hadn't run away. She wasn't away from home. She was in her neighborhood when she was picked up. And this is, can you tell us more about this case and other cases like this?
I think it's just so important to recognize and always center the survivor voices. And I know that you've spoken with Rose in the past, which I'm so glad to know. And she really has helped set this movement to recognize abuse on pornography websites on fire through her bravery of speaking out publicly. And I think her story was first broke through the BBC. And it has really opened the door for so many more survivors to start coming forward and sharing their own stories very similarly. Unfortunately, you know, we've seen so many cases of videos of sex trafficking, videos of child abuse, non-consensually shared pornography, videos of assault uploaded to pornography websites, Pornhub being one of the primary ones. And none of the progress that we've been beginning to see in these last few months against these sites would have ever been able to happen without survivors like her speaking out.
Definitely. And it's such a burden. And we see her being tormented consistently on social media and other survivors being told that they are lying and they're gaslit on a consistent basis. So it takes a lot for them, and they suffer that trauma consistently even after coming out. So it's very important for all of us who are safe in our home, you know, might be safe in our homes and watching, to uplift their voices and support them. And so, yes, so we were talking more about this right to sue legislation for victims trafficked by pornography sites.
Right. So our organization has not had a chance to fully go through the legislation. Legislation's so complicated, it always takes a lot of time for us to review before we know if we can endorse or not. But I think the idea of victims, of survivors suing these pornography companies is a no-brainer. We need to be doing this. Luckily, it has started to happen already. And we saw earlier in the year, over 20 women who were trafficked onto a pornography website successfully sued them. Now there's a case in Canada of victims of Pornhub suing them. It seems like there are just more and more lawsuits coming out with survivors at the forefront against pornography websites. It's happened in France and the Czech Republic as well. And I believe that there will be more in America very soon. So I think that's something that we absolutely want to see more of.
And that's sometimes the case, right? That the technology grows and yet legislation hasn't caught up yet to all the growth. And that is why it takes a little bit of time before. But other laws can be used, existing laws can be used to build cases against these gigantic companies. One of the things that has been delightful to watch, and just because it's the power of the people, and when people who intend well get together, then it can cause this gigantic change. Otherwise, we think that, oh my God, these gigantic companies with billions of dollars in income and to spend, how can someone fight against them? Tell us more about Pornhub and MindGeeks. How Mastercard and other credit card companies pulled out. How did that happen?
So this really was just exactly as you said. It was the result of a lot of individuals just gathering together. So I first met with Visa and Mastercard in February of 2020. And shared with them the story, Rose's story, and many other examples of abuse content on Pornhub and other pornography websites, but Pornhub being one of the most mainstream, it definitely just quickly becomes a focus. Mm-hmm. And they were shocked. Mastercard told us that they had no idea that this content was on there, and they launched some internal investigations at that time. But the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. And so for months, throughout the summer, we were communicating with them. And we also had an international joint letter with advocates from 13 different countries who wrote to them asking for them to sever ties with this exploitive company. And then I believe it was December, the New York Times came out with a really powerful piece called The Children of Pornhub. And it was an op-ed by Nicholas Kristof. And it went through the cases of many survivors who'd had their videos on Pornhub. And that sent shockwaves and just added another level of pressure on these companies to do the socially responsible thing. So finally, at this point, we've had a fantastic victory, a huge step forward. They've cut ties with Pornhub. You mentioned MindGeeks. So it's an incredible victory. Something like this has never happened before. It's upending, the industry. So we need to celebrate that. But Pornhub is one website, certainly one of the largest, but it's owned by a big company called MindGeek. They're based in Canada. They have offices all over the world. They own so many different websites that have very similar exploitation content on them. Mastercard and Visa have not cut ties with the entire corporation, only with the Pornhub website. But we're not done. We're continuing to go to them and explain to them why the entire industry is filled with exploitation. And so we've had incredible success. And I just think it needs to fuel our flames even brighter to ask them to completely cut ties with this exploitation industry.
And one of the things that we were talking about as we were doing some research for the show was that now with digital Bitcoin and digital currency, this is another way that people will be, especially in the dark web, where people are using this currency much more than the regular Joe Schmo down the street. That is also another frontier that will need to be perhaps, and it could be. Do you think that this would be a good time to get into that space before it explodes and becomes mainstream?
It's a great question. It's something that we're talking about, even currently. And it was fascinating. There was a period of time when all of these credit card companies discovered the credit card company also cut ties with Pornhub, made that decision. And then the only way that you could pay on Pornhub was cryptocurrency. So it is interesting to see that is a trend that I think will be upcoming for us to be working on.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the International Center of on Sexual Exploitation. I'm going to say that again, the International Center on Sexual Exploitation. This is a big step. Congratulations to all of you. You've done excellent work in the United States, and now you're currently based in London. And so tell us more about where the center is going and what sort of broader topics are you all addressing now?
Yes, we, over the years, we would every now and then get involved in an international issue, not that strategically, really, just because this work and exploitation, it doesn't know any geographical boundaries. And while every country and community has its own context, there's also some real similarities in trends of how grooming occurs or the way that these different forms of abuse intersect and reinforce each other. So essentially, with launching this new international effort, we're working to really capitalize on the fact that we have an international coalition of over 300 nonprofits and advocates around the world who are fighting on different forms of exploitation and abuse. This summer, we had an online summit, thanks to COVID, and we had 22,000 people attending from over 120 countries. So it's exciting to see that there is such a global desire and response, and there's advocates on the ground all over the world who are working to make their communities and their countries better. So our effort is really just to help them connect with each other so that we don't reinvent the wheel, see how we can learn from each other. And then when it's strategic, to add our voices all together, like we did on the Mastercard and Visa campaign, because it makes such a powerful impact when people from around the world call for the same improvement for human dignity.
Especially as globally we all are connected and the world becomes a smaller place. This is and what I've always noticed in this sort of work is people who are committed to evil connect with each other. They work together, and so people who are committed to goodness should also connect and work together. And that's exactly this is. I was so happy to hear that news that the center was going beyond the boundaries of the United States and really is bipartisan. This is something that we can all agree on, whichever side of the aisle you are on in any country, that our children need to be protected and survivors need to be, especially of gruesome crimes like this. For example, like and many countries, I feel like, are looking in some ways for leadership from organizations such as this. For example, in Thailand, many poor families in rural regions are often offered $200 to $1,000 for their daughters. I was just reading an article in India where along a truck route, parents are selling their children, and this is happening here in I've read stories in Tennessee and New York. So this is a very global problem, and some of these solutions are very they can be the same solution, and sometimes you have to obviously give it that local feel to it. So how does the center plan on addressing that? Where can those global solutions be put into place, and where do you go for local solutions?
I think there's some tried truths that we can always rely on. One being that often people just don't talk about these issues, and it has to do with sexuality. So people feel nervous, ashamed. There's certainly, different communities maybe have some stigmas around discussing those issues in public, but these issues thrive in the dark. And so we need to shed light on them in order to fix them, obviously in ways that are appropriate for any community. So raising awareness is always going to be helpful. Also, with something like sex trafficking, one global solution, for example, is that we know that the sole revenue generator for sex trafficking is sex buyers. Sex buyers are the demand that's driving and fueling the entire industry. So while policies might look different from place to place, we know that policies that work to combat sex buying is really helpful for shrinking the marketplace so that less people are exploited. And of course, always advocating for more resources for survivors to exit the sex trade or to exit an abusive relationship or whatever that situation is. That's something that we can always advocate for.
And this is something I wanted to ask you about the impact of COVID on sexual exploitation globally. It's particularly here in the United States as well. And people tend to think that, children are not in school, they're at home, so they may be safer. Are they safer?
Not necessarily, unfortunately. We've actually seen cases of child sexual abuse material or child pornography rising during COVID. And we think a lot of that is, again, people are spending more time online than ever. It makes them more vulnerable to being groomed into maybe sending explicit images of themselves or for people to seek out that material. So we've certainly seen an increase in that. And we also know that many sex trafficking victims or survivors, but people who are currently being trafficked during COVID were not just suddenly set free. They then had to maybe risk COVID in addition to their own sexual abuse by continuing to be bought and sold. So it's unfortunately still a very real problem.
There is the center has a program called Safe Schools, Safe Libraries. Share some tell us what that is about, and especially as the vaccine comes around and children start going back to school.
Yes, this is so important. Unfortunately, so there's a couple angles to this. One being, unfortunately, many libraries do not have filters on them to filter out pornography. That's a big problem. Not even filtering out child abuse materials. And there have been many cases of people going into the library, watching that material, and then acting out and harming someone in the library. So that's a big problem. And on our website, we have some tools for how you can talk to your librarians about those filters. And similarly with some school devices. But what's interesting with COVID is the rise of online learning. And in many districts, that includes the schools giving out or suggesting that parents buy things like Google Chromebooks for their children to do their homework on. Unfortunately, they don't put on any filters on in most places. They don't put any filters on that. So that's important for any parents who are listening. You know, if your children are using technology for school, go through and make sure that the parental controls are on. They most likely have not been automatically turned on. That is one reason why we are reaching out to Google, asking them to do the simple step of making any devices like that are given to schools and to children in school, have the filters automatically turned on. It seems like it should be so simple for them to do. It's kind of complicated for parents to figure out. Teachers are confused about it. Administrators are confused about it. It takes multiple steps in a row in order to put those safeguards in place. But it's really important. So any parents listening, I would encourage you to look into that.
That's so, and see that like that. Naturally, you think that is they would take that responsible step, and I'm sure there are plenty of parents working at Google who would have thought. But we've heard that Google staff, especially their board members, and don't give their own children Chromebooks. So perhaps they're not experienced with what other parents have to handle. So this is that's such something like you never think that the library won't be safe. We hear about playgrounds, we hear about, but a library is someplace especially where you would send especially a 12, 13-year-old and be comfortable that this is a safe environment for them to be in. I'm just when I was reading through that was something that's just like popped up, and I'm just like, we encourage children to read. We want them to go check out books, but that's not all that's available in your library. Technology is everywhere. Haley, this work is a struggle, and it really is hard work too. It's hard on the heart. It's hard work, and it's hard work. What are have been some of your biggest struggles in this field?
I think, it can be quite depressing, and I hope that I'm not depressing anyone who's watching or anxiety inducing. It's easy to walk around the world and just view all of the things that could go wrong, all of the things that do go wrong. And you can't live life like that. You have to, unplug from the computer and enjoy things. I think that the thing that really keeps me going, despite the way that it can be quite overwhelming sometimes, is to see all of the people who are trying to help. And I think that's something that I'm very blessed in through my position, because I'm meeting all of these incredible advocates around the world, completely different worldviews, completely different personal backgrounds, but who all share this passion and dedication to stop sexual exploitation and abuse. And when I think about that, then it makes me feel far more hopeful. And victories are happening every day, whether with corporations, legislation, even just community awareness. So so while sometimes it's overwhelming, it's good to step back and see that the light in the darkness can be just as overwhelming.
So thank you so much. Yeah, definitely having to disconnecting and really just enjoying the blessings in life is definitely something. How about struggles that you've seen on a broader community-wide level? What are some things that you feel are just as an advocate working that if more people knew about it, that you feel that that advocates like you would not have to face that struggle?
I think one thing is people always assume that abuse or exploitation would happen to someone else. People think it might happen in a different country or a different city, certainly not in their own community. And unfortunately, we know just statistically it happens in pretty much every community. So I think people being really aware that it's going to happen close to home. So being aware of that, being able to then support those who have been negatively impacted by some form of abuse or exploitation. That's one thing. And I think another thing is people feeling like they can call out and challenge exploitation. People feel helpless a lot of the time. And so helping people to feel empowered to name exploitation, to say that, our organization's position is that pornography and sex trafficking and child sexual abuse, sugar dating, prostitution, all of these things, sexualization of children are harmful. And so, you need to be able to call out evil in order to tackle it.
Definitely. One of the things that when you were talking about earlier is the Dirty Dozen list. And I've been following this list for a while. In fact, there are several other organizations who are working on totally different topics, who have been using that same terminology. Now there's a Rohingya genocide Dirty Dozen list that has all these big corporations who are being a part of profiting from the genocide. So that's something I wanted to share, that you guys put that out, and brilliant work on that. So what were some of the 2020 Dirty Dozen?
So we had Google was on there in large part because of their Chromebooks. And we also had Amazon. Unfortunately, they have a high number of incest-themed erotica books on their website, and a lot of other really terrible things as well. We also had, let's see, there's so many. Well, Twitter is a big problem. They host so many accounts that have pornography, ads for prostitution, which could be ads for sex trafficking. There's no way to verify or differentiate. And some hashtags that even openly promote the sharing of child sexual abuse materials as well. Twitter certainly has done a lot of really harmful things in their policies. And the 2021 Dirty Dozen list, as shown on the screen, I believe, that's coming out this February, so in just a couple days. And people can learn more about that at dirtydozenlist.com. And like I said, we really try to give individuals a chance to speak out and to make a difference.
Yeah, I'm looking at this massage envy. How many of us use that, right? How many of us are watching Netflix and our kids are on TikTok? So, or we might stay at a hotel window. So what can someone who is a consumer of one of these organizations or corporations on this list, what can they do?
Often people will write to me and say, do I have to never order anything on Amazon again? How will I ever live? No, we're not necessarily calling for boycotts of these companies, because we often find that taking action is more powerful than inaction. So Amazon might not notice if you stop using them, but they will notice if you write them a customer complaint or if you call them out and tag them on social media for the harmful things that they're promoting. So that's usually what we encourage people to do, is to reach out. And sometimes people feel nervous about doing it. No one wants to look crazy, but it really does make a difference, and it really does make victories possible so often.
Excellent. That's an excellent point. Lots of, and we've talked about this earlier in another show as well, about slacktivism versus activism, and where can how far does slacktivism take you? But this is in today's world, especially post-COVID, slacktivism can be a part of sustained activism if you are doing it with consistency, and it is sometimes some of the I meet some of these folks who are like, I make it a point every day to call out one company every day. That's all. Like it takes maybe 5 minutes or 2 minutes to do that, but because they're so consistent, it bears results. This is, we're going to be winding down the hour pretty soon. I'd love to share, give you the platform, or say, sharing whatever you wish to share with some of our audience on how they can get involved with your work, how they can, if this has something that is personally touched them, this topic has touched them, how can they become a community leader, or just even if, how can they get your newsletters?
Yes. So our website, endsexualexploitation.org, is a great place to go if you're looking to get involved or even just to learn more. On that website, you can sign up for our newsletters. dirtydozenlist.com is how you'll be able, if you go to that webpage, you can sign up and get notified when the new Dirty Dozen list comes out in February. And that list will have many ways that you can take action with just a few clicks of a button. So it's a really nice way to get involved. Also, we have a law center, and our law center is working to really represent survivors of exploitation against institutions that have facilitated or allowed that abuse to occur, and especially in precedent-setting cases. So if you or someone you know has been harmed, maybe through a pornography website, through a hotel, or a website like Seeking Arrangement, or a social media company, feel free to reach out to us. And our email, public@ncose.com, is on our website. So you could email us if you have any questions about that. And we can also direct you to other resources as well. And I would also say, our organization has a lot of resources on its page. If you need more advice about how to talk to your children about protecting them from sexual abuse, or if you're struggling with pornography and watching that, we have a lot of resources to help people overcome that. And we have many resources even for the wives or family members of people who struggle with pornography, because they sometimes need some extra support as well. So we don't do everything, but we try to create these resource lists to help direct you to other groups that could be helpful as well. So I really encourage you to go on and poke around there, because I think it'll be very helpful for many. Mm-hmm.
So as the new administration comes into power, what are some of, especially in the United States, what are some of the things that you're looking forward, some changes, and what are some things that you were perhaps apprehensive that but might not be pushed forward as much as they were pushed forward in the last administration?
Mm-hmm. I think it's very important to pass the Earn It Act and to really continue having a view towards big tech that creates some more liability for them, but even more importantly than liability, creates incentive for them to do the right thing. So that's a policy point that I would really love to see championed in these next 4 years, and also more focus on combating demand. The sex buyers that I mentioned earlier. In any administration, that's something that I would be promoting. And very often politicians are slow to talk about that issue, because unfortunately, many men have purchased sex in the past, and then they don't want to speak out against it, or the sex trade has been normalized to them because of that experience. So that's something that we really want to see promoted, both in the U.S. and around the world.
So important that we and that organizations realize that this is a human rights issue. Those of us, our organizations that are working on domestic policy or international policy, because it really a human being should, when we talk about safety, and when it's not looked at through that lens, when it's looked at, a lot of times we find that it looked at through a free speech lens. It's looked at as a right, oh, I'm also watching this extreme push towards right to work as a sex worker without any sort of safety net for victims, for people who will be exploited, even when we're calling them, oh, they have a right to sex work, and don't call it prostitution. I've been hearing that a lot, and that is something that concerns me a lot. Is that when you take away this framework, when you take away that human rights framework, when you take away that safe, victims and survivor framework, and you're looking at it specifically through those lenses, it can damage and really harm the work that has been done so far. And I'd love to get your comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's of real concern to us as well. And, something we've found through the research and through speaking with survivors is that prostitution causes physical and psychological trauma, and that trauma cannot be regulated away. Whether it's legal, decriminalized, criminalized, or the Nordic model or the equality model, it causes trauma to so many people, to the point where many women have PTSD on par with what war veterans have experienced. So I think that that's an important thing to realize as well. And just like you said, we have to recognize harm when it's being caused.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. We're at the end of the hour, and we really appreciate your time and for being here. And we're going to keep following your work. And those of you watching, please, if this has touched your heart, get involved. The Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thank you so much, Haley.
Thank you.
Yes, as this new year has come on and we are looking at planning for Justice for All work in the upcoming months, I do want you guys to mark January 26th for an absolutely much needed webinar that will be taking place on Hindutva in America, in American politics, as well as, and then we'll be having follow-up webinars on Hindutva in US tech companies, and how it is affecting schools. This is an extreme ideology that is being spread around the country, and we want to make sure that our audience recognize it when they see it. And then on February 5th, please do look out for us having a Kashmir Day event taking place on February 5th. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and please watch us on Muslim Network TV, Galaxy 19, Roku TV, Apple TV. See you next time. Assalamu alaikum.